May thy knife chip and shatter.
May thy knife chip and shatter.
So, as you can probably tell, today on the Blurred Wire, we are talking about Dune Part Two. And we had to start with at least what's my favorite quote from the entire film. Is that your like? Where does that stand in the quotes for the film for you?
Oh, I was quoting Elvis Presley. I wasn't
Oh,
quoting. Yeah. Did you not
I
see
thought we were
Elvis?
doing. Oh, I didn't get a chance to see it. I guess it's
Did I?
just
I think I saw the wrong Austin Butler movie.
possibly. You know,
I think I did. Oh,
it's probably
shoot.
hard to imagine that they're the same actor after seeing those two movies.
He had a little bit of the Elvis in him.
You can
Spoiler
see it.
alert. He
Yeah.
had a little bit of that Memphis twang on Arrakis.
So I think with obviously because Dune Part Two, there is so much to unpack. We're gonna have to do our own Part One and Part Two for Dune Part Two. So we'll start with a spoiler free. So if you haven't seen it, if you're fine to watch this, we'll stay away from spoilers and we'll check each other to make sure that we don't spoil anything, but just to give a base review. And then in a couple of weeks, we'll do a spoiler one just to make
Just,
sure.
just to make sure in case you feel you want to go in blind, which I highly recommend. Please do
Oh,
go
yes.
in without seeing as much as you can.
Yeah, like you don't need to know from us that it's good before you go see it because it truly is. It truly is. And even while I was in the theater, I remember thinking like, is this as good as everybody says it is? And then I was like, yes.
Oh,
Yes, it is.
I had a friend of mine who got to see it opening night and then went with
Oh,
me the next day, the next morning when I got to go. He said, "You can set your expectations all the way like up here
hmm.
and it will still exceed them."
It still
And
did.
and it still did for me because my expectations were through the roof.
And I think that's a powerful point, powerful part of avoiding spoilers because I think that worked so well because the trailer hid a lot of the parts that made the movie great. It still allowed you to be surprised and be blown away by the movie. Even all the stuff that because like nowadays with movies, you hear almost everything about it weeks before it's ever in theaters.
Hmm.
Reports and stuff, everybody talking about, theorizing, especially
Yeah.
with Marvel movies. So it's very rare for a movie to be able to come out and not be kind of blown to bits by speculation before it comes out. And this movie is an excellent example of not having to go through that. And it
Yeah.
created a masterpiece that like just left me like sitting in my seat. Like I just got to experience that.
I think it helps that the story being told is like 60 years old anyway.
Yes. A lot of
So
people
like
don't know it. Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
it's gonna be different. It's not gonna be one to one, but
Hmm.
it's gonna be you already know the story.
So I guess we'll start like what are some standout actor performances for you? Again, we'll try to keep it spoiler free, but standout actor performances.
Yeah, we're only gonna be talking about things that you may have been able to see in the trailers
Hmm.
before release. Um, stand out for me, I mean, Timothy is incredible
Yep.
in this film.
Yep.
Um, he I think he did an impressive amount of growth on the character level from part one to part two. He's very cautious, almost at times like a wide-eyed deer in part one, kind of just
Yeah.
staying in the background, taking in everything as it's being presented, standing behind his father or his mother as they are taking the lead and he's observing how to do things. And in part two, we get to see him act.
Yep.
Um, and boy, does he act.
Oh my
He
gosh.
there's a lot of subtlety in certain moments, and there's some scenes towards the end where he delivers a lot of like power um in his voice, and it's incredible.
And I mean, based upon the trailers and the reviews, I was kind of thinking Austin Butler is going to steal the show for his performance because that's kind of what everything was gearing up towards. Is what it looked like. Like he was gonna kind of be like, that guy that. But this was Timothy Chalamet's movie. That
Hmm.
like after seeing it, I was like, oh yeah, he did not allow, like he didn't allow himself to be outacted, and like I said, Austin Butler was phenomenal. Obviously,
Hmm.
um, did you know, like, I don't know, do you remember growing up on like Zoe 101 and stuff? Because I used to watch
No,
that a lot as
I
a kid.
didn't know it was him. I did not know that was Austin Butler because he's also the dreamy kid from iCarly that Sam and Carly are
Yes,
like
so
thirsting over
funny.
that plays guitar. I had no idea. I saw this TikTok that was like Austin Butler's career, and I was like, "Excuse me,
I
you don't
didn't
get to
even
clock me like that at 10 a.m."
I didn't even realize he was in Elvis. And then I knew the name and I recognized it. And I knew I was like, oh yeah, I'm pretty sure he was like a teen star. But like I kind of thought he like guest starred on like Drake and Josh or something. I couldn't exactly remember. And then I
Hmm.
finally looked it up and I was like, oh, this is that kid that we were
Hmm.
all upset that Zoe went with instead of Logan in Zoe 101. Because again,
Hmm.
that was my childhood. That's what I grew up
And
on. And
Hannah Montana. He was in Hannah Montana as well. He made the
yep,
rounds for
he was
like,
that dreamy kid with all that.
mhm.
And I'm like, something tells me if he was like portraying Fayed in those roles, like maybe he wouldn't have been like the dreamy kid. I think it would have been like a slightly different perception. Um,
I think the surfer hair he had back then
mhm.
was a lot more heartthrobby than the completely shaved look that he had
Yeah, the black
for
teeth doesn't
Dune.
really scream like dreamy, so that's this kind of understandable.
Yeah, I don't care how well you can play guitar, buddy. If you got black teeth and you're shaved head to toe, I don't think two teenage girls are gonna find you as a heartthrob.
Imagine him like, oh Miley, oh, I'll take you back to Harkonnen. I'm sorry. It's just so crazy because, like, as a kid, like, even looking back, you could, like, actors' careers obviously are going to grow in things, but, like, you just never imagine, you know, him being able to do that. Because, like, we've
Yeah.
talked about it before. There are some actors who just play themselves. Ryan Reynolds just plays himself. You could
Hmm.
never cast him as the role of a Harkonnen. That
Hmm.
will never work. You just don't do it,
Hmm.
But there are some actors who just play the role and they have an incredible range. And now I didn't think I would have to put dreamy Zoe 101 kid into that category, but Austin Butler has to be in that category now.
I think I think the power of Dune 2, I really hope if Timothy and Austin Butler's acting careers already weren't blowing up enough,
Oh yeah.
I truly hope they do. I hope these two become like our next Harrison Fords for what Star
Oh
Wars
yeah.
did to him. I
Hmm.
want that to be what this is for Austin Butler and Timothy, which they already are slated for a lot of big movie roles
Hmm.
coming up. So it seems like it's working. They're both such talented actors that I'm so excited to see whatever they do.
Well, like a lot of people have been theorizing that Timothy Chalamet could make an excellent Nightwing in the DCU, and I
Hmm.
think he would work really well for that too. My only fear is like he's already almost too big. Like if you like, unless you were gonna make a Nightwing movie, where Dick Grayson is the lead,
Hmm.
maybe if you made like a Teen Titans movie and he was the lead, but like like he won't be able to play a background role
Yeah.
almost ever again after this because
Hmm.
well, it's like Tom Holland. Like you'll never see him in a background role ever again. Like once you get to a certain point of acting, it's like you just don't. And so like I feel like Robert Downey Jr. only took kind of like a background role in Oppenheimer because he had already reached the peak of Endgame and like we haven't seen the peak of Timothy Chalamet's career. So like I
Hmm.
hope that we see him as Nightwing. Like it would be cool to see him as Nightwing or leading like his own Teen Titans team. But I
Hmm.
don't think like we'll never get Timothy Chalamet as Batman's sidekick.
Yeah.
I don't think we won't be he's just too dynamic and too powerful of a star now.
Unless you got an absolutely unit of a dude to be playing Batman to make him look tiny by comparison.
Exactly. And like a lot of people have theorized Alan Richardson could play Batman. And like I can see that too, and he would make Timothée Chalamet look tiny. But as far as star power, Timothée Chalamet is quite a bit higher than Alan Ritchson. Alan Ritchson is great, but Timothée Chalamet has ascended to like another nebula. No pun intended. Talking about Dune. So,
I think I think too, Rebecca Ferguson
oh yeah,
absolutely killed it. I mean, she was I when I saw the casting for part one, for the first time, and I saw Rebecca Ferguson was playing as Lady Jessica, that was my dream pick. And
oh
she
yeah,
absolutely killed the character's role. She plays this incredibly strong female character, this strong mother, and this planning Benny Gesserit. And she she feels very different at points here. It's she kind of slots in with Fremen culture in a unique way.
hmm,
And the way that she does it is kind of terrifying at times.
yeah.
Seeing her on screen is like I felt this like internal like need to like stand up straight, like straighten my back,
You
because
felt like she was, yeah,
like just her presence was so powerful that
commanding,
it yeah, very demanding.
commanding.
um
Yeah, yeah,
Commanding.
yeah, yeah. I think she was absolutely incredible, and like we didn't really talk much about the actors in part one, because like I thought Jason Momoa did a good job playing Duncan Idaho. It was a good performance. It wasn't like like blown away, but it
Hmm.
was a good, very solid performance. He captured the character very well. I think one of my favorite performances from part one was Oscar Isaac because I really liked seeing him as Leto. I think he did a great job portraying Paul's father. You could feel the emotion, you could feel the depth, and I was genuinely sad when he died. And like that's how
Hmm.
you know that like an actor did a fantastic job when you feel like genuine emotions.
Hmm.
And so, um, and in this film, like I said, obviously Oscar Isaac wasn't in it. And a
Hmm.
lot of actors did like a really good job. Like Florence Pugh, I think she did an excellent job in her role. It wasn't exactly like, again, not blown away by some of the like compared to some of the other stuff that she's done. I think Denis, the director, is saving her character for like this kind of felt like a setup for her character. Like, we didn't see a whole lot, but we're gonna get more in the future. But like you said, Rebecca Ferguson, Austin Butler, Timothée Chalamet, and Zendaya. Like those are kind of my
Hmm.
standouts in acting performances for this film.
Which, to circle back to Florence Pugh, her role from book to screen was incredibly limited. Like, if
Hmm.
I'm trying to remember, it's been a minute since I've read Dune, but I believe she has, if any, lines of dialogue, like one or two. Most of her role is heading the chapters in these like historical, because before every chapter is this like historical book from the far future talking about the current events as if they've already passed, and
Hmm.
it really bends like time that way. And so she's writing a lot of that, and we get to see a little bit of it in the movie with her recording her journal entries as she did. But I think Denis expanded her role just a little bit more, and I'm
I mean,
so
he had
thankful
to.
for it,
Yeah, he put
because
Florence Pugh in it. He has to. Like,
Florence Pugh is so great that even in such a small role, I
mhm,
think she really she understood the assignment. She
yeah.
came she came to work that day, and with however little she was given to actually work with, I think she really brought it home.
And seeing a legend like Christopher Walken, um, just still captivate. I mean, again, his role was arguably even smaller than hers. Like he had less screen time than she did. Um, and I'm like trying to describe it without like avoiding spoilers, but I think he did a fantastic role of showing the range of emotions from the Emperor. And you could kind of see that like beneath all of his confidence and prowess and like emperorness was a lot of fear. And I feel like Christopher Walken did a good job of portraying that because you could kind of tell. Like, I mean, that's the whole reason why he partnered with the Harkonnens to destroy the Atreides because he was afraid of Leto Atreides. And
Hmm.
after watching Dune Part One, you could kind of see because Leto Atreides was a very likable guy, like
You'd see
very
that
likable. I could
fear.
see him being emperor, and for a guy like Christopher Walken, I mean, for a guy like the emperor, he doesn't like that. And I feel like Christopher Walken did a good job of like a nuanced portrayal of like confidence that's kind of driven by also like the fear to protect his power.
Speak two things on that. I think Christopher Walken, he wasn't as standout as everyone else surrounding him. So I think just by virtue of everyone else kind of like bringing some of their greatest performances ever, Christopher Walken next to him feels a little flatter. And definitely, I was a little apprehensive about him as the Shaddam Padishah Emperor, but I don't know, it felt weird. He didn't do a bad job. He certainly didn't do a bad job, but I think still after seeing it, I personally would have chosen somebody else.
Really?
I
Okay.
saw someone online say how great Patrick Stewart would have been for that Emperor as a number one, a nod to 80s Dune,
That would
because
have been like
there
a callback,
he
yeah, because
plays
he
he
played
plays
Gurney.
Gurney Halleck
Yeah.
in David Lynch's Dune, but then also I think he has a very similar like royalty, but he's also
Hmm.
like he's much older now, and I think that's a strength for how Christopher Walken's Emperor looked like, dude, you're about to, like, you don't look like
Die.
you have much more gas in
Yeah.
the tank. Like
Hmm.
the sullen look in his face at all time, even when he's um on his home planet. I really feel like, yeah, I can see why you're worried about who's taking the throne next, because you don't have much time left here.
Left. Yeah, you gotta take it all while you can.
Um, but then, like, what you're talking about fear, who really blew me away was Dave Bautista. He
Oh,
did
yes.
in like my easily my favorite thing I've ever seen him in was part two specifically,
Really?
because when he is interacting with Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, he looks terrified.
Oh,
And
yeah.
to have that like machine of a man, to
Hmm.
have Dave Batista look terrified, number one, shows that he's definitely grown as an actor. I think he gets typecast a lot as just like you're the bulky brute of a
Yeah.
guy, but
Bulky, funny guy. Yeah.
he did so much with his face in this
Hmm.
movie of just showing how terrified of his life he was, and
Yeah.
just the strength in that performance to be able to look at Dave Batista and feel genuinely like, yeah, dude, you might die. Like, I would be scared too.
And watching him next to, I don't think this is spoiler because I've seen some clips for this on the online, but like watching him next to, Austin Butler's character Fade, and like seeing like again, like on paper, if you have a guy like Dave Batista sitting next to Austin Butler, okay, you know who's the one that's gonna be like crouching down and like, okay, don't hurt me.
Right.
But of course they obviously reversed it. And it just kind of showed how like um like I almost wish we got more of like the psychopathic nature of Butler's character. Um,
Hmm.
but it just shows how like um that difference in mindset because he's like a sadist who like literally enjoys pain, and
Hmm.
that freaks out Raban so much because Raban is very afraid of pain. He does not want to be hurt. He does not want to die.
Hmm.
But Fayed doesn't care. And that
Hmm.
creates a whole different spectrum of it creates a whole different spectrum of just who's in charge here because
Hmm.
again, you might look like you're stronger and everything, but you have fear. It felt like
Hmm.
Austin Butler's character truly didn't have a fear of anything. And I think it was a very I think Dave Bautista did a good job of bringing out the dichotomy and the difference between it because that allowed us to see like, oh, how this character is so different. Because like I
Yeah.
said, this one that was in charge of the spice who lost it, he's totally afraid of dying. He doesn't want to die. He doesn't want to get hurt. And this
Yeah.
other character, he welcomes it, you know?
Yeah. And we get to see them both interact with Arrakis and
Mhm.
how now that the Harkonnens are trying to take control of like spice production on Arrakis, they both have their own inputs and ways of doing it, and they both react very differently to the circumstances of which, and it's really interesting to see how their characters play out differently
Mhm.
in those different circumstances.
So now, how do their characters differ from the books? Like, was that kind of how like Raban was always like the more like he obviously had like a violent side, but like I said, more fearful, protective of his life, while Fayed was the more like sadistic, crazy one.
Fade is was always crazier. Fade felt very much closer to his portrayal. Raban is not nowhere near as much in the book. He plays a
Oh, okay.
much smaller role. I think they kept him around more so for Gurney Halleck's sake in
Hmm.
in this movie because how things turn out for him play out very differently in the book. I won't talk about it here. It plays out very differently, and I think his character doesn't have as much screen time in the book either. I think what is still there is that fear of the Baron, whereas Fade is not afraid of the Baron. I
Yeah.
think that key like difference in their character of where Fade absolutely is being groomed to take over for Vladimir, whereas Raban is not, and it shows, and it
Yeah.
shows why he would feel that way.
Yeah.
How did you feel? We've talked a lot about the great houses. Let's focus in on the Fremen. How did you
Mhm.
feel about Stilgar? Because he feels very different from the albeit brief bit of time we got to see him in part one. He takes up
Mhm.
a very different role, and almost a comic relief role in this
That's what I
movie.
was, because like the in the beginning, I was like, because like Dune Part One, like I was really impressed with Dune Part One. I'll say because it is definitely not a comedy. Not
Hmm.
even close. I don't think there's a shred of anything funny within that movie at all. And I'm
Hmm.
like, I feel like I respected Denis a lot because, I feel like, especially now, like I love comedy movies and I love action that has comedy in it. But
Hmm.
sometimes directors will, because it's so popular, they'll want to add in some comedy and stuff and it ends up bringing down the story. And I'm like, I feel
Hmm.
like I respected Denis a lot for resisting that in Dune Part One.
Hmm.
And then I feel like in Dune Part Two, again, it's not like I wouldn't consider it a funny movie. I think it's just the way Javier Bardem was portraying Stilgar and being introduced to the Fremen community. I feel like funny stuff just kind of happened. Like
Hmm.
in the movie theater, like the audience around me like kept laughing. I'm like, why are you guys laughing? Like
Hmm.
it's about to pop off. But
Yeah.
it's like we're getting to know the Fremen, we're getting to know their community, and they're not all like, rigid, it's like a very different portrayal. Because like when you look at we got to know the House of Atreides a lot more in the first one, and they're all
Yeah.
very proper, prim, and it's like the Fremen they're living off the land, but like when that chick makes a joke like, oh, she's about to drink worm piss, it's like,
Hmm.
it's like the Fremen is like more of a community, and
Yeah.
so it really helps you get to know them. And I think like I don't think Javier Bardem did that on purpose. I think it's just like when he saw Stilgar and the way he was portraying him, and I feel like it just kind of ended up happening. And like at first I was like, "Oh, I guess this is funnier than I imagined." And it wasn't until I got to the end that I realized how important that was. But also
Yeah.
I think Javier Bardem is a very like I didn't realize how powerfully religion would play into this film.
Hmm.
We kind of get glimpses of it in the trailer, but again, try not to spoil too much. And for him to become, because there's even a sneak peek where he shows how much he's invested in Paul. And like in the first film, in the very brief appearance, he was like, if you live or if you die, whatever.
Right.
But then you realize, like in this film, he said that because in the back of his mind, even in the first film, he was hoping that Paul was going to be this promised Messiah, but he couldn't
Hmm.
just put his faith in him right away. He had to give him a chance to prove himself. And
Right.
then even
And
after that,
it's not until he defeats Jameis that
yeah,
he, oh, this could be the
this
Lisan Al
could be the
Gaib.
guy. Yeah. And so then, and it's so interesting to see. And I kind of wish we got more of that between, is he the Lisan Al Gaib, or is that just a myth? And the way
Yeah.
Zendaya's character, that's why I think her performance was really stand out too. And I think from the books, like I think Denis really decided to give Shani a much more pivotal role, because I don't think, like, even watching the Dune 80s movie, like the actress that plays Shani, she pops up on screen to make out with Paul, and that's it. Like, I don't think she has a speaking line in that movie other
Yeah.
than I just made out with Paul Atreides and we had a kid together. And so I think Denis definitely gave her a much more pivotal role. And seeing her interact with Stilgar, and again, just the, is this the Lisan Al Gaib or not? It's like, or is that just a myth? And the way she believes, like, the Fremen should be the one to save the Fremen. We shouldn't be having an
Well,
outsider be our,
yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
we don't want to get too much into that part because I
Oh,
think
is that
that
spoilery?
I don't remember that being in the trailer myself. The dissidence of religious,
Versus not? Okay. Well,
because I think that really leads into the
the main
like
conflict of
the
the film.
sport, yeah, the spoiler parts of it.
Well, then we will move
As-
away from that right now. Sorry, guys, because we told you that was spoiler free.
um I think, yeah, so you give a lot there. When it what you were first talking about, like the tension and the comic relief, I think it absolutely does an amazing job at building that sense of community that
Hmm.
the book was always trying to do. It just did it in a very different way. It made the Fremen a community by how much they relied on each other through structure, how all of their systems are built in place that no one's just thinking for themselves. Every action, every job by a person is for the benefit of the community as a whole, the Fremen. In this movie, I think, as just be by it being a movie, we get to see that, and we get to see that by them laughing
Hmm.
and them being together, because you don't really get that in the book, and I think that's the
Okay.
perfect way to change it for a movie, because we get to see there's nothing that clicks in your head quicker than just a group of people laughing after battle as like y'all are tight. Like you guys
Exactly.
are like this. Like you would die for each other right now. Even though you may have differences when it comes to religious beliefs or how things may end up, like you guys are ride or dies, all of
Yeah,
you together, the Fedaykin.
exactly.
But then
And
too, it being like comic relief, I think serves twofold, because in the first
mhm,
part, both parts of Dune are tense, but for different reasons. Part one is tense because it's very like secretive and political and like whisperings and plottings. Um, and so to have comedic relief there would feel like it kind of undermines some of
yeah.
that tension, because all of the tension is coming from words and characters like
Hmm.
that. Part two, a lot of that tension is coming from like violence and violent action. And so for there, I feel like comedic relief is an appropriate, like you need tension. If we didn't have any kind of relief of any sort, however minor it may be, this movie would have felt overbearing at points.
Because
And
it
so
was
I think
very dark. Yeah, at
it was
some parts.
much heavier because
Hmm.
things that part one set up get executed in part two. And
Yeah,
there's a lot of execution in part two. So that
literally.
there's so much that you need some kind of relief so that you can get through with it still feeling as powerful as the first time. And I think the fact that it serves twofold like that
Hmm.
is excellent storytelling.
And I think the way Denis did it is, like, the way he did his comic relief is like a staple that every director should look at, because you can tell in a movie there, this is a part where the audience is supposed to laugh. Like when Tom Holland is talking to the other Spider-Man in Spider-Man No Way Home, like that's clearly a part. It's funny. The audience is supposed to laugh at what he's saying to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in this movie, all the comic relief was just the Fremen talking to each other, and they were laughing and having a conversation. So it
Hmm.
wasn't like he didn't have to edit it to leave space for laughter or anything like that. It
Hmm.
just kind of it was very natural, and it was kind of like if the audience laughs at this, okay. If they don't, whatever,
Right.
it's just part of the
It
story.
it's still
Like,
informing the characters. It's still building up the world. It's still informing you
mhm.
of how the Fremen work on the internal level.
Exactly. It wasn't like the jokes weren't really for the audience. It feels like the jokes were for the Fremen, for each other to laugh at, and as the audience, if you laughed along, you started to feel like you were a part of them, and that was kind of the whole point. Because in a movie like you obviously can't really compare Thor: Love and Thunder to this movie. It's completely
No.
different.
I'm
But
if we were in person right now, we'd be throwing hands. Why would you even bring up Thor Love and Thunder?
my only point is like that's one of those movies that if it's not funny, it completely falls apart because if the audience isn't laughing at it, there's nothing left.
Yeah.
Because it's literally edited for space for the audience to laugh in theaters.
Yeah,
And nobody was laughing.
that was such a bare bones like bore of a time.
Exactly. But in this one, like I said, I didn't laugh at everything everybody else in the theater laughed at. But again, it was like, oh, I don't really like you can if you want to, but if you don't, you're still going to get a lot out of it.
And if I feel like some of the laughter wasn't even necessarily because it's funny. For me at least, some of it was just like I'm scared and I'm
I'm laughing
laughing.
because I'm scared.
Like at
Yeah.
some part, like it's so just like I can't believe this is happening.
Hmm.
I have to do something because my body won't just let me sit with this tension that is happening.
Yeah. Like I said, there's an extended preview online that kind of shows their conversations that they have. And like the one that Stilgar has with Paul, you can really like from that conversation, you can see like how far they've come. And just from the
Mhm.
end of Dune to this point. Because it's when he's encouraging him to ride the worm, you know, to go yeah, epic scene. I heard it took 3 months to film that
That is
to get it right.
hand I think we're about to get into like some of the cinematography and the shots and how that was
Oh yeah.
composed, but hands down the best part of the movie. And this
Hmm.
really isn't a spoiler at all. It's Paul learning to ride a sandworm. In the book, it's
Hmm.
such an engaging scene. It's one of the highlights of reading it is him getting his footing. Um in the movie, at I felt like it was like the Trinity explosion in Oppenheimer. It was that same for me as an audience member. It had that same like hold my breath in awe kind of moment as, as a nuclear bomb going off,
Yeah.
as Paul trying to ride this gigantic sandworm for the first time.
See, for me, my moment is a little bit different, but I can't go into it on this one because it'll spoil some things. But I see. So from your perspective, you think that is that like the moment of the book, like that's supposed to be the pivotal, like your favorite scene?
Not I just think it's a really cool and like well written part of the book, but I
Okay.
just mean visually in the movie, it
Yeah,
was
visually,
so
definitely.
breathtaking
Hmm.
that to me that's easily my favorite part.
And
It
when I,
was just I could watch that on repeat.
yeah,
I have a friend she's obsessed with Batman, and for her, the Batman with Robert Pattinson, the whole car chase scene. We were talking about this movie, and her car chase scene is my Paul riding the sandworm.
Sandworm.
Like obsessed. I could have it on like on repeat in my house 24/7 and never get bored with it.
Yeah, and to me, like the part that I could have on repeat in my house was the quote that we just had at the beginning
Hmm.
because that just Um, but I think like when we talk about cinematography, because I think, and again, Denis, like he does, I really hope he gets an Oscar for this movie. Especially like I can't wait to be able to watch Dune Part One and Part Two back to back
I
because
know.
I feel like he knew that Arrakis is a planet full of sand. And here's the thing: it's beautiful, but there's only so many ways that you can show that before it kind of gets old or almost stale. and they're on Arrakis for majority of the first movie and for pretty much all of this one, part two.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, he saved some of his best cinematic shots, cinematography shots for part two. So like he literally had to hold himself back because I could tell there were shots in this one that he
Mm-hmm.
didn't put in Dune part one because he's like, no, I want to make sure, again, I have part two coming. I want to make sure that I have another shot that's going to continue to engage the audience. Because seeing some of the shots in part one, I'm like, oh, he could have put that in part two. I'm like, he could have put that in part one, but he had to choose not to. He had
Yeah.
to go, hey, I'm going to save this because, again, we're building something.
I have yet to see part one again since seeing part two. I have a feeling just from stepping away from part two that part one is gonna feel flat by comparison. Like
Just from the
an
shots, yeah.
already a stunning like visual movie. I feel
Hmm.
like some of the are just so breathtaking and mind-blowing in
Hmm.
part two that part one is just gonna feel a little stale by comparison.
Right. Like I'm gonna see part two again, but I don't think I'm gonna watch part one until they're both out, and then I'm just gonna watch them back to back.
Do a double screening.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ooh.
Just for comparison. Because it's just it really does take your breath away. And it puts you in and like the moment when he's the thing that I loved about the way he did the shot with the sandworm, and I don't think I've seen a film that's done this, is because he did it in a way where you felt like you were on the worm with Paul. And that's
Yes.
a testament to the cinematography, to the sound design, to Timothée Chalamet's acting, to all of it working in comparison to where it almost felt like we were in 4D and we were writing it with him and feeling that experience. And that like it was so immersive. All of that had to be working together in order to create that experience. Because I didn't even see it in IMAX, which looking back was a poor decision. But I'm pretty sure I just because it didn't have the right.
Go see this movie in
I know,
IMAX
I
if you
know.
can.
It was just timing wise, like I could only get there at that certain part. But like for me to
Yeah.
feel that invested, when I come back down to Florida, we'll try to see it in
We'll
IMAX
go see it
together.
in IMAX.
Yeah.
Or at the very
And
least like a Dolby Cinema or something.
yes, yes. But when I saw it like that, like I said, even in just the normal, like, I don't even know if it was probably Dolby surround sound because every theater is, but like I said, it wasn't even an IMAX, and we still felt like we were in that world. It was just
Hmm.
absolutely phenomenal. It is a phenomenal film, and it is going to clean up at the Oscars because I mean, especially with everything that we know is coming out this year, I don't see any film that's competing with it. And again, I was watching it, and I was like, because like most of my knowledge of Dune comes from you because it's something that I always knew that
You're
you loved
welcome.
growing up. Yeah, thank you. And all the reviews and everything has been it was like it crushed the tomato meter, the Rotten Tomatoes to meter,
The
and
tomato meat.
it's like thermometer. That's how you say it. That's literally what it's called. I'm not making it up. I swear.
Thermometer with the tomato meter.
But it was like it became like this critical darling, and I remember like watching it and I was like, are we sure? Because like yes, it's good and I'm enjoying it, but I'm like we haven't really got to like the critical darling, and then we got there, and we probably won't be able to talk much more about this without getting into spoilers, so we'll probably have
Mhm.
to save it for our part two on Dune part two. But I mean, obviously if you haven't seen it, go be a part of this experience. I
Go
mean,
watch it.
please do.
There's you will have no regrets.
Not even one.
If you are sick, it will cure you. If you are ailing emotionally, it will lift you out of that dark place.
And after we saw Madam Web together, this is exactly what I needed.
This is
Just a good
the
movie in
palate
theaters.
cleanser for
Yes.
for Madam Web.
I feel like I appreciate it more since I had saw Madam Web. So I don't really regret that decision, you know.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it reminded you of how good movies can be.
Right? So we'll probably next week we'll probably be talking either about the 80s one or part 2
because
of
we
our
want to we want
Dune
to
coverage.
save our part two for when Will and I are in person and we can watch it together and talk about it together. And
Experience it
it will
together.
probably be 5 hours long, and we'll both be crying by the end.
Yeah, this trial version of Zoom probably won't be working. We try to use for these right now. Um, so we'll have to figure that out when we get there. But
Mhm.
thank you guys again for tuning in. Again, this is just scratching the surface, which is crazy to think because we spent close to an hour just talking about it, spoiler free.
With
And
yeah, trying to be reserved and not talking about the things we want to talk most about.
right, and
Uh,
it's because we haven't even gotten to the character and stuff, but that because a lot of that's spoilery. So, um, yeah, we will see you guys next time, and thank you guys for tuning in. And yeah, I'm really excited to talk about the '80s Dune though next
yeah,
week. That'll be fun,
as a change of pace.
right? I feel like if this movie had come out a month later, it would be so funny if for like April Fools everyone came to see part two and they just started playing the '80s Dune
They played
instead.
David Lynch's Dune.
Oh my god,
They did
that
the
would.
double feature David Lynch's Dune and then the documentary of Jodorowsky's Dune, the Dune movie that never existed but was
Uh,
planned.
have you ever heard of the Dune TV show that actually had James McAvoy?
Yes, the Sci-Fi Channel.
Yeah, on the
It
Sci-Fi Channel.
budget was really poor. It looked like a Sci-Fi Channel show, but it captured a lot of the spirit and a lot of the weirdness of Dune. I think
Okay.
it's a little more accurate than 80s for like some of the stuff that's happening, but 80s is weird in its own way.
Oh yes, and we will get into all of that with Lori when we get there. And I might even try to check out the sci-fi one and maybe have a little bit to say on that one too next week. But thank you guys again for joining. Keep watching because again, you want to be there when we talk about Dune Part 2, the spoiler edition. Like Part 2 of Dune Part 2 is we are going to go crazy. I
Cinema's
cannot wait.
back, baby. Go watch this movie.
Oh, cinema is so back. So back. Like I said, like we talked a lot about on Madam Web, how like as a film student that film made me angry. As someone
Hmm.
who studied film and cinematography and sound design, the Dune Part 2 makes me feel inferior.
Hmm.
And like that's how you should feel, like as a film student, just like,
It makes you feel
oh,
like you've got a
there's
lot to learn.
yeah, like there's like I will never be able to create something like this. But I'd rather feel like this than be like, why do these people who made this film have a job right now?
Hmm.
Like, and that's how we should feel. I feel like with $1 million films.
Yeah.
Just saying. So, we will see you guys next week to talk about the '80s Dune. And again, thank you so much for watching. And Ty, thank you again for coming on with me.
Happy to. Go watch this movie, form your own opinion.
Please do. We'll see you next week.